My name is Maya Reeves. I was 32 years old the night my mother chose my brother's party over the biggest achievement of my career, and I learned exactly what I had always been worth to this family. I remember every detail of that restaurant table. The white cloth, the single candle I had lit myself, the bread basket I'd already eaten half of, because I'd been sitting alone for 40 minutes. My phone screen kept lighting up, and every time it did, I felt a small, embarrassing flicker of hope that someone was calling to say they were on their way. The restaurant was one of those downtown Chicago spots where the noise wraps around you like a blanket. Couples leaning in close, families crowded around big round tables, kids climbing over laps, fathers laughing too loudly. I sat at a table for 6 with a single glass of water and a look on my face that I'm sure the server had seen before and quietly pitied. I'd passed my professional engineer exam on the second attempt. I'd been promoted to lead structural engineer on a federally funded bridge rehabilitation project, the kind of project that had my name on the official paperwork, not just buried in an appendix. I'd booked this restaurant 3 weeks in advance and told my mother the date 4 times. She had said, "We'll be there, baby. We're so proud of you." When my phone buzzed, I picked it up already knowing, the way you know a thing before you let yourself know it. Her text read, "Jordan's announcement dinner ran long, and now everyone's over here celebrating. You understand, right? We'll do your thing another time. Love you." I put the phone face down on the table. I looked at the bread basket. I looked at the candle. I called the server over, asked for the check, and paid for 6 people's worth of appetizers I had ordered, so the table wouldn't look too empty when they arrived. Then I walked out into a November wind that hit me in the face like a slap I had earned, by expecting anything different. Before I tell you what I did and how it changed everything, tell me something first. What time is it where you are right now? Because I want to know how far a story travels when the people it belongs to couldn't even drive 20 minutes to hear it in person. If you grew up as the other one in your family, you already understand the specific language of being overlooked. It's not always loud. It's not always cruel. Sometimes it's just the way a room shifts when your brother walks in and doesn't shift when you do. The way your parents' faces open up for him and stay politely closed for you. The Reeves family had always orbited around my brother Jordan. He was charismatic in that effortless way that made people want to do things for him. And my parents had been doing things for him since he was old enough to flash that grin. When he dropped out of community college to start a construction company with money my father had been saving for his own retirement, my parents called it bold. When I took out loans for my engineering degree, they called it practical and moved on to the next subject. Jordan built Reeves Construction into something real. I'll give him that. Small residential projects at first, then commercial, then a few government contracts once he figured out how to work the bid system. My father used to brag about it at every family dinner, like Jordan had personally built the Hoover Dam. My mother kept a framed photo of Jordan at a groundbreaking ceremony on the mantle. Not a single thing I had ever accomplished lived on that mantle. I'd brought home Dean's List letters, an internship at a Chicago infrastructure firm, my first published engineering paper. My mother had said, "That's wonderful, honey. Did you see Jordan got a new truck?" I had spent so long trying to outrun that particular kind of dismissal that I had built an entire career on the energy of it. Every exam I passed, every project I led, I had done it with my jaw clenched in a way that would probably cost me a dental bill someday. That night, walking back to my apartment from the restaurant, I made a decision I had been putting off for 2 years. I opened my phone and started searching for apartments in Portland, Oregon. My firm had a Western regional office there, and my manager had mentioned twice that they'd love to have someone with my credentials on the ground. I had always made excuses. Too far, too big a change. Too much like giving up on the idea that my family would eventually see me. I stood on a corner in the November wind and thought, that idea was never going to be anything but expensive. I emailed my manager that night. I said I was ready to discuss the Portland transfer whenever she had a moment. She responded in 11 minutes, which told me everything I needed to know about how long they'd been waiting for me to say yes. I did not tell my family I was leaving. I did not tell them my new address. I did not call to explain or to give them the chance to talk me out of it or to make promises they would break again. I sent my mother a text 3 days before my movers came. Taking the job in Portland. I'll be in touch. That was it. The text sat unread for 6 hours, and when she finally responded, it was a string of questions I didn't answer. I am not telling you this to sound cold. I am telling you this because the version of me who had spent 32 years explaining herself to people who weren't listening finally understood that explanations were just another form of asking for permission. I was done asking. Portland was a revelation. The office sat near the waterfront, and on clear mornings I could see the mountain from my desk like it was personally there to remind me that scale was real and my old life was small. My team was sharp and collaborative in a way that made me realize I'd been operating in a low-grade professional depression for years, always bracing for the moment someone would decide I wasn't worth their full attention. Here, people pulled up chairs when I talked. When I caught an error in a load calculation on our first project together, my senior manager didn't just thank me, she put it in writing in my review. I learned to stop waiting for the floor to drop out from under me. I learned that not every room was a Reeves family dinner. I kept my distance from home. My mother texted on birthdays and holidays, short messages that were warm enough to feel like contact and thin enough not to require anything real. My father sent the occasional forwarded news article about construction industry trends, which was his version of thinking about me. Jordan had never been a big texter, even when things were good, and things were not good, so his name didn't appear on my phone much at all. I knew in a loose background way that Reeves Construction had kept growing. Jordan had landed a few larger public contracts, a community center in the south suburbs, some municipal parking structures. My mother mentioned them the way she always had, with a kind of breathless pride she reserved exclusively for him. I half listened and changed the subject, because Jordan's business was Jordan's business, and I had my own blueprints to worry about. 14 months after I moved to Portland, I was assigned to a task force reviewing structural integrity reports on federally adjacent projects across multiple states' work that intersected with local and state contracts, not just federal ones. It was a broader mandate than my usual scope, and I liked the puzzle of it. I liked sitting with a stack of reports and finding the thing that didn't quite add up. I was 3 weeks into the assignment when I pulled a batch of inspection files on a school construction project in Cook County, Illinois. New elementary school, mixed funding state money, county money, a federal education infrastructure grant, the kind of project that had a dozen oversight bodies, and, in practice, not enough of any of them paying close enough attention. I looked at the materials certification documents first, the way I always do. Concrete mix specs, load-bearing steel grades, compressive strength testing results. I ran my eyes down the columns, and something snagged, not dramatic. Just a quiet wrongness. The kind you only feel after years of knowing what right looks like. The compressive strength numbers on 2 of the concrete pours didn't match the approved mix design. The deviation wasn't enormous, but for a foundation slab on a building where 280 elementary school children were going to spend their days, it was enough. More than enough. I ran a secondary check on the supplier certifications and found a discrepancy in the batch tracking numbers. Someone had used a cheaper concrete mix and submitted paperwork for the approved one. I flagged it to my manager and started a formal documentation file. She escalated it to our federal oversight contact. Standard protocol. Then I looked up the name of the contractor on the project. Reeves Construction, LLC, Jordan A. Reeves, Principal. I sat very still at my desk for a long moment. The mountain was visible outside the window. I looked at it without seeing it. I thought about the last time I had been in a room with my brother, his announcement party. The reason my mother had texted me from a restaurant table I had set for my entire family. I thought about how he had stood at the front of a banquet hall and grinned in a way that made everyone in the room feel like they were in on something special, and how I had been sitting across town paying for an appetizer spread that no one ate. I thought about 280 children. I closed my eyes for about 4 seconds. Then I went back to the documentation file and kept working. I want to be honest about something. I did not act immediately. I spent 2 days asking myself questions I am not proud of. Is this actually serious? Or am I reading too much into it? Am I letting personal history affect my technical judgment? If I push this forward, am I doing it because I believe children are at risk? Or because some part of me has been waiting 17 years to watch Jordan face a consequence? The answer I came back to, every time, was that it didn't matter why I noticed it. It was real. The numbers were the numbers. A foundation slab with compromised compressive strength under a building full of children was not a thing I could file away because it had my brother's name on it. If anything, having his name on it made me more careful. Not less, I triple-checked everything before I sent a single document up the chain, because I knew that the moment this became visible, someone would look for any reason to say I had an axe to grind. On the third day, I sent the complete file to my manager, with a written disclosure attached. The disclosure stated that I had a familial relationship with the principal contractor and requested that a separate team lead all subsequent review and any enforcement action. My manager thanked me for the disclosure, told me it was exactly the right call, and said she would handle the rest. She also said, "Do you want to notify your family before this moves forward?" I thought about the breadbasket, the single candle, the text that said, "You understand, right?" I thought about calling Jordan and warning him, giving him the chance to come clean, to proactively remediate, to do the right thing before the state forced his hand. There was a version of me who would have made that call. She had spent 32 years believing that if she could just explain clearly enough, patiently enough, with enough love and enough data, the people in her life would eventually do better. I had moved away from that version of myself, along with everything else I'd left behind in Chicago. I told my manager that I did not plan to make contact with the contractor, that I wanted the process to be clean, and that I trusted the review team to proceed without me. I went back to my other work. I did not call my mother. I did not call Jordan. I went home that evening and cooked dinner, and watched the lights on the water, and waited for the part where I felt like a traitor. It didn't come. What I felt instead was something I hadn't expected, a kind of quiet steadiness, like standing on a structure you've tested and know will hold. The state review team moved fast. Within a week, they had sent inspectors to the site. Within 10 days, they had pulled the certifications, run independent materials tests, and confirmed the discrepancy. The remediation order came down 14 days after I submitted my initial file. Halt all work, re-pour the affected foundation sections, full audit of all materials used on the project from day one. Jordan's response was the response of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. He went on a local construction industry forum and posted a statement calling the review a politically motivated overreach by federal bureaucrats who've never poured a yard of concrete in their lives. He hired a PR firm, which was a choice that mostly served to make the story more interesting to journalists. He gave an interview to a Chicago business publication in which he called the materials discrepancy a minor clerical error by a subcontractor and said that his company had the highest safety standards in the industry. I read the interview from my desk in Portland. Outside the window, the mountain was doing what it always did. I took a long sip of coffee and kept reading. The PR strategy fell apart quickly, the way these things do when there are children involved. Parent groups at the school organized. A local news team ran a segment. 3 former Reeves construction employees contacted the state review board independently and provided sworn statements about being pressured to use unapproved materials on previous projects to cut costs. It turned out the Cook County School project was not the first time, only the first time someone with the credentials to catch it had been looking. The civil penalties were significant. The contracts were suspended. The federal education infrastructure grant funding was clawed back with interest and fees attached. 2 of Jordan's largest outstanding bids were disqualified, pending the outcome of the review. He lost his bonding. My mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I let it ring once, then picked up, because I had decided I would answer when she called. I was not hiding. I was not running. I was just done performing emotions I didn't feel. Her voice was tight in the way it got when she was trying to stay controlled. "I assume you know what's happening to your brother." "Yes," I said. "Did you have anything to do with it?" I had thought about how to answer this question. I had decided the truth was the only thing worth saying. I submitted a materials compliance report as part of my job. The discrepancy I flagged was real. Children were going to be sitting on that foundation. There was a silence. Then, "Maya, that is your family. And those are other people's children," I said. "And those are also other people's children. He could lose everything." Her voice cracked at the edges. "He's worked his whole life for this company." "I know," I said. And so have the parents who trusted a school district to make sure the building their kids walk into every day isn't going to fail. You always had to be right, she said. The crack in her voice was gone, replaced by something harder. Even as a kid, even when it hurt people, I noticed that I wasn't crying. I noticed that my voice was steady. Mom, I reported a safety deficiency in a public building. I don't know how to have a conversation about whether that was the right thing to do. She hung up. My father sent a text 4 hours later. It said, "Disappointed in you." 3 words, nothing else. I saved the screenshot in a folder on my phone and did not respond. Jordan did not contact me. I had expected anger. I got silence, which in its own way was more honest. He had always treated my existence as optional. The next few months were not cinematic. There was no single dramatic moment of reckoning, no public confrontation, no speech I got to deliver in front of a crowd. There was just the slow, administrative machinery of accountability doing the thing it's supposed to do. Inspections, hearings, financial penalties. The school project was remediated properly. The foundation was repoured. The building opened 7 months late and structurally sound. I read the local news coverage when I could, and then put it down and went back to work. I was in the middle of a bridge rehabilitation project that I genuinely loved, the kind of work where your decisions live in the physical world for decades, where the margin for error is real and the satisfaction of getting it right is also real. I had a team that trusted my judgment. I had a city that didn't know my brother's name. The whistleblower protection review concluded about 4 months after I submitted my initial report. Because I had documented the conflict of interest disclosure properly from the start, and because the safety findings were substantiated and had led to verified remediation, I was eligible for a portion of the federal penalty recovery. My attorney, I had retained one, early in the process, which was advice I am glad I took, called me on a Wednesday morning to discuss the figure. I made her repeat it twice. It was more money than I had made in the previous 4 years combined. I did not buy anything dramatic. I paid off my student loans, which I had been carrying for a decade, and I sat with that particular sensation for a while, because it felt like setting down something heavy I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it had weight. Then I started thinking about what I actually wanted to do with the rest. I had been thinking, since before the review concluded, about something that had bothered me throughout the entire process. The materials discrepancy I found had been submitted by a subcontractor under pressure from the project's general contractor. I knew this because the employees who came forward said it explicitly. They had raised concerns internally and been told to sign off on it or find another job. People in skilled trades, in construction, in any industry where physical safety intersects with cost-cutting pressure, they see these things all the time. Most of them never say anything. Not because they don't care, but because they don't have the professional standing I had, or the legal knowledge, or the job security that comes from working for a federal adjacent firm with whistleblower protections baked into the contract. I used a significant portion of my recovery to set up a nonprofit. I called it the Foundation Level Project. The name was an engineering reference that I knew most people would miss, and that I liked anyway. The mission was simple: provide free legal consultation, documentation support, and reporting resources for construction and trades workers who identified safety violations but didn't know how to come forward without losing their livelihoods. We partnered with a legal aid organization that already had infrastructure in place. We built a simple intake process. We trained volunteer attorneys on the relevant federal and state whistleblower statutes. Within 8 months, we had assisted workers in 4 states in submitting documented safety complaints. 2 of those complaints led to formal remediation orders. I am not telling you this to make myself sound saintly. I did not start the foundation level project out of pure altruism. I started it partly because I knew, somewhere specific and personal, what it felt like to be in a room where the person who built the thing everyone depended on wasn't considered important enough to show up for. My mother wrote me a letter, about 8 months after our phone call. Actual letter, paper, my name in her handwriting on the outside of the envelope. I held it for a long time before I opened it. She wrote that Jordan had closed the company, that the penalties and suspended contracts had made it impossible to continue, that he was going through something hard, and she was worried about him. She wrote about the years my father had put into the business, helping Jordan get started, and how it felt to watch that end. Near the bottom of the page, in smaller handwriting, like she'd added it after she thought she was done, she wrote, "I know we haven't always made you feel like a priority. I'm sorry for the night of your dinner. I've thought about it more than I've told you." I read it twice. I put it on my kitchen table and ate breakfast looking at it for 3 mornings in a row. It was not a full apology. It was not an accounting of 32 years of sitting in the background while someone else had all the light. It did not address my brother's announcement party, or the mantle that had never held anything of mine, or the way my father's voice had changed registers when Jordan walked into a room versus when I did. One paragraph could not carry that weight, and I did not expect it to. What it was real, more real than anything she had said to me in years. I wrote back. I told her I was glad she had written. I told her I understood that watching the company end had been painful, and that I wasn't without compassion for what she and my father had lost. I told her that the safety violation was not something I could have looked away from, and that I needed her to understand that it had nothing to do with Jordan's success, and everything to do with elementary school children who deserved a building that wouldn't hurt them. I told her I was open to rebuilding something with her, something honest, but that it would have to be built on what was actually true, rather than on a version of our family that only worked if I agreed to keep being invisible. I told her I would call on her birthday. I did. We talked for 40 minutes. It was careful and uneven and full of pauses where neither of us knew what to say. My father got on the line for about 5 minutes, long enough to be polite and not long enough to be warm. Jordan did not come to the phone. It was not a resolution. It was an opening, and I chose to walk through it at the pace it deserved slowly, with my eyes open, without pretending it was more than it was. Here is what I know from the other side of all of this. Your family of origin does not determine your value. I know you've heard that sentence before, so let me say it the specific way I mean it. The people who had the most opportunity to see you clearly are sometimes the least equipped to do it, because seeing you clearly would require them to revise a story they've been telling about their family for decades. That revision is uncomfortable for them, in ways that have very little to do with you. It is not your job to make that revision comfortable. I spent 32 years being the engineer in a family that treated my precision as a personality flaw. I brought rigor and documentation and careful thinking to every room I entered, and in my family, those things were considered a kind of coldness. Too much in my head, too serious, not fun like Jordan. What I discovered, in Portland, on a federally adjacent task force, looking at a materials certification document from a Cook County elementary school construction project, was that my precision was not a flaw. It was the whole point of me. It was the thing that found the number that didn't belong. It was the thing that held the line when sentiment and family loyalty would have been so much easier than the truth. I did not bring my brother down. I read a document and told the truth about what was in it. If there is a version of that story where I'm the villain, I've tried to find it, and I can't. What I can tell you is this. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like the least important person in a room full of people who are supposed to love you, if you have been told, in words or in silence, that your achievements are a footnote to someone else's story, hear me. The table you set for people who don't show up is not proof that you aren't worth showing up for. It is proof that you know how to set a table. That skill lives in you regardless of who comes to sit at it. Go set it somewhere else. Find the city that doesn't know your brother's name. Find the team that pulls up a chair when you speak. Find the work that puts your precision and your rigor and your careful, unstoppable brain in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. And if that work someday asks you to tell the truth about something hard, if it asks you to choose between loyalty to people who've spent years making you feel small and the safety of people who have nothing to do with any of it, you already know the answer. You've always known it. That's why they called you too serious. Speak it anyway. Build it anyway. Someone's foundation depends on it, and this time, I mean that literally. Thank you for being here. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the one in your family who always saw what others chose to ignore? And if you were ever in a position where doing the right thing meant a real cost to someone you loved, What did you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.